All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here. This webinar was really designed to address questions from a number of school teams, most of whom were trying to more successfully include students with Angelman in their regular general education classrooms. And they were really struggling with how to focus on the student's communication system and all the alternative goals of a communication system while also trying to include the student in the general curriculum. I will say right up front, I don't think anyone has really completely figured this out. The most support and ideas I've gotten has been from the speech-language pathologist Gail Van Tatenhove with her descriptive teaching method. There's a number of materials online where you can look her up, and I'll make sure to put some links to Gail's work in the Facebook group to help you just kind of find some of those resources. But she was kind of the one who most helped get my thinking on the track that you're going to see today. And I think this is more than anything else something that we are still figuring out. So after this webinar, if you're having trouble applying it or if you have some successes, ideas, we really invite you to be part of a dialogue about what is working in these areas, because this is tough. This is really tough, but hopefully you'll get some ideas from here, and it's something we can build on. The main question I think we're looking at in today's webinar is why we support our emergent AAC users in the regular curriculum and how we can support them. I think most people I talk to about this already have a very strong belief that it is valuable for their students to be in the regular class and exposed to the regular curriculum. But I get a lot of questions about how do we go beyond exposure? How do we actually know our students are learning? I see probably more work going into this area, trying to help our kids access the general curriculum in those classes by some of the most dedicated teachers. I see them spending hours trying to develop visual materials and other things to help their kids participate. And what I'm hoping is that from this webinar you'll learn more ideas that will actually save you a lot of time, because so many educational assistants and classroom teachers and special educators and speech therapists are investing enormous amounts of time creating materials that can really only be used for one lesson or one unit. And what we've been working on in a number of classrooms is just how to be much more efficient with our time by better integrating the student's communication system into the classroom. So when we look at this webinar and we look at Maureen Never's kind of 5 steps program, the instructional targets that we'll be talking about are really how do we support and balance our goals for our students around language development, as well as mastery of the content or learning the knowledge, learning the information that's shared in a regular classroom. We'll be looking at teaching strategies that just help to create that access, to create access for our students to participate both in the language of the curriculum and the ideas that are shared by that language in the curriculum. We'll be talking about how to use the student's communication system to do this, and just a little bit you'll see some examples of student responses that start to give us an idea of what they're really learning about the curriculum, how they're engaging with the curriculum. It will be very helpful if you have an AAC system in front of you during today's webinar. So if you have your student's app, if you have their light tech backup, if you have something about your student system, there are several places in the webinar where I'm actually hoping to get responses from you guys about how you would use the student system in that specific example that I'm providing. So take a second and grab that system or iPad if you've got it, so that you can actually try to apply some of these ideas during the webinar. While you're doing that, if you're still scrambling to grab an iPad or something, from just informal surveys that I've done personally within our Angelman community, it appears that about 1 out of 10 of our students with Angelman spends most or all of their day in a regular classroom. So their IEP says they have a placement in a general education classroom for at least the vast majority of the day. So only about 10%. About 6 out of 10 of our students spend some significant portion of their day in the regular classroom, and that's kind of anything from about 40 to 80% of the day, based just on how parents report to that. And most of the time when those students are with the regular classroom, they're actually there for what's considered specials and the non-academic portion rather than the general curriculum. And these might include lunch, recess, gym, music, art. There's definitely a strong sense that the specials, or kind of the extras, all those other little pieces of the day, they're more social, they're more flexible, they're more fluid, and that they're therefore somehow easier to include our students in. So we know that the majority of our students with Angelman syndrome spend at least some part of the day in the regular classroom, but often not the part of the day that would expose them to what we would consider kind of the core of the general curriculum. So think a minute about what is the purpose of the general curriculum. Why do we send kids to school in the first place, and what is it that we're hoping to learn? Why as a society that we do this? If you have an idea, raise your hand or go ahead and make a comment. I'm going to show you a few examples that I've just found from the research on education, but I would love your contribution to this. One of the most common ideas that comes up is that we create a general curriculum, we create the institution of public education in large part because we're trying to create a sense of national identity and social identity. We're trying to bring people together so that they really identify as being part of a specific population that has specific responsibilities. We want to establish a baseline of information so that we have an informed democracy. Our founding fathers were actually very concerned about whether democracy could work, whether the public could become educated enough to actually be part of major decision-making processes. And so public education is really founded on the idea that we can establish a common level of information and skills or knowledge all across our population so that everyone is enabled to participate and contribute as citizens. And we educate students because we're trying to help them make sense of their own experiences and their own place in the world, to learn how to answer their own questions. You know, kids naturally are so curious and are trying to explore, you know, cause and effect and what's that and show me this and how come it did that. And we're trying to teach them how to learn and how to make sense of things. We want them to be able to realize, to learn how to learn and to realize that they can answer their own questions. So then when we take a look at our students with Angelman, does all this apply to them? Do we have the same, is there the same imperative? Is it as important for our students to develop a sense of national identity? You know, for students in the US or Canada or England, are they learning that they're English versus Canadian versus American? Does that matter if you have Angelman syndrome? Do you need that same common baseline of knowledge and skills? Do you need the same ability to make sense of your own experiences and place in the world? I think the resounding message that you're going to hear from the folks who are working the hardest to make this happen is that yes, all of these same things apply, and in fact, it's even more important for our students with Angelman, because when our students with Angelman are in the regular classroom, they're contributing to the idea of national identity. They're helping to create that sense that Americans also have disabilities, Americans are diverse, Americans communicate in a lot of different ways, that there's unique skills to support these citizens who have Angelman syndrome to participate and to contribute. There's unique technologies, and we need a common baseline of knowledge for how to do that, how to support all of our citizens who have disabilities to be able to participate and be included, and to make sense of our experience of them. You know, part of what our students with Angelman are doing in the regular classroom is helping other students make sense of what is disability, what does it mean, how can we answer our questions about it, and how can we inform our own thinking as we go forward. So knowing that general education students are going to go on to become teachers and principals and lawmakers and educational assistants and doctors, we would say that students with Angelman syndrome are an essential part of their education, of their public education, so that they can be more effective in those roles afterwards. Just to give you some examples to hopefully make this a little bit more tangible, because I know many of our families have struggled with the idea about whether the general curriculum really has something to teach their kids. Can it be relevant? Can it be meaningful? Can it motivate them? And here I'm going to show you two examples from work Maggie has done. So my daughter Maggie is currently 12 years old. She's in grade 7, and I think it was around grade 4 that her class studied Black History Month. And it was around that time that she had gotten the app Protocol to Go, that her team had been trained on how to model the use of it, how to get other students to use it in her classroom. And at that point, she wasn't using it very often at all in an expressive way. And to be honest, she still doesn't. She's very reticent in how she uses her system. It tends to be kind of a special occasion when she really is willing to get out her AAC and use it. But this was a really exciting time. So this would have been February. Because that's when Black History Month takes place. She would have had her AAC in place since about September of that year. So I think it's about 6 months in. The students are studying all about the American Civil Rights Movement and how African American citizens were able to really start claiming their rights to equality and participation in society. There were two things that Maggie did that were really powerful that year. She became extremely focused on the civil rights leader Ruby Bridges, and when Maggie becomes very focused on a topic, she's very intense about it. She tends to follow it through very closely. So if it's a favorite TV show, favorite musician, favorite anything, she's very focused. And the only Black history leader that she really became interested in was Ruby Bridges. If you don't know the story of Ruby, she was a very young African American girl in Louisiana who, when her family insisted on her right to attend the regular white school, every single white family boycotted that school for an entire year. Ruby was taught by herself by just one teacher who was willing to teach her while the entire community boycotted the school. She was escorted to school every day by federal marshals. But this was her struggle. Her education was really considered a turning point in the movement towards integrating our schools. And after that first year, the white students actually returned to the school. The boycott of the school ended, and she was a pioneer in desegregating that school. Maggie was very interested. They made several adapted copies of books about Ruby Bridges. She was every single day she had opportunities to type with the alphabet, to just select letters and scribble to explore the alphabet. And when she chose Ruby Bridges as a topic, it was really interesting that she chose, if you see her typing here on the right side, lots of E's and lots of R's. And when her teacher made a quick little video of this, it took like 10 seconds, and it was just a video of her saying, "Wow, Maggie, that's a lot of E's and that's a lot of R's. It looks to me like you were thinking about Ruby." And the photo that you can see that she was typing around is actually an illustration of Ruby Bridges. So she said, "Let me show you how to type Ruby," and she just spelled in this video R-U-B-Y. Maggie watched that video hundreds of times. She walked up to people, and she never had an iPad, but she had to show that video to as many people as possible. This was several years ago, and it was personally painful for me in two different ways. One, it showed me that I don't think Maggie had ever been told by a teacher that she was smart, that she had just shared a new idea, and that her idea had been understood. But she did, and she completely claimed that she knew what her teacher had said. It was really her version of, "Put this on the fridge, Mom, because this is my A+. I was understood," using the symbol set of the alphabet. The other thing that was just really devastating for me about this was that My daughter is in a fully inclusive placement in an elementary school that adores her, and why she seemed to be able to identify with Ruby Bridges. If she truly was identifying with Ruby Bridges, then she was identifying with a young girl who experienced complete rejection and inclusion, whose differences were only highlighted, who was not warmly embraced by that school community. And I think that this was the year when I first realized that Maggie knows she is different. She is trying to make sense of the world and her own experiences, and it's the general curriculum that gave her the opportunity to explore that. It was the general curriculum that actually provided a role model of, here's someone who actually had this same experience as you, of being so different, who experienced far more rejection, and look what happened. Look what she was able to go through. Maggie also was able to use her communication system to describe Ruby Bridges as Black, beautiful, and brave. And that was when we started to realize that up until then, we had not found a way to really know how much she had learned. But once she could actually find some words to describe her, that told us so much about what she was taking away from this unit. Around the same time, or maybe a year later, I can't quite remember anymore, several years ago, her class was studying ancient civilizations and ancient Egypt. I took Maggie to the Royal Ontario Museum with some classmates so that she could hands-on see what ancient Egypt had looked like. We have a beautiful exhibit there. They saw mummies, they saw sarcophagi, all kinds of things, and one of Maggie's friends made her a video and a pictello book about that trip. And they were supposed to be describing what a mummy is, right? We're supposed to be on the academic program, but her friend described the mummy as nasty, and they were particularly grossed out by the mummy's toenails. And they just could not get over the toenails on the mummy and how nasty they were. When Maggie was later assessed about her knowledge of the Egypt unit, she described mummies as old and as nasty, and that gave us an insight into what she had learned. She also, with different alphabet activities we were doing, she was at that point able to show us that she knew that M is for Maggie, me, mom, and mummies. So she had just made some really clear linkages. Some of the materials that her classroom made was, around this time, they started making alphabet books of each new curricular item, or each new curricular unit. And so they're studying Egypt, and so they made an alphabet book. You know, P is for pyramid, C is for canopic jar, C is for Cleopatra, etc. And one of her classmates, actually, part of their assignment was to take Maggie's Proloquo to Go. It's a core word-based system, and could they define the vocabulary using the words that are available to Maggie in her system. So a pyramid is big and old. It is made from triangles. I think they also said something about rocks and stone, but this is just the copy I have. S is for sarcophagus. Dead bodies were put in the sarcophagus. So this was the kind of materials that her classroom was using. Something that was quite powerful was, I just happened to be in the back of the class during that unit one morning, just dropping something off for Maggie, and I heard the teacher say to Maggie, so let's talk about what we've been learning so far about ancient Egypt. Maggie, you get us started. You choose a letter for a word you're thinking of about this unit, and we're going to figure out what word you're thinking of. And Maggie selected the letter C. She had a letter board on her desk. She selected the letter C. I mean, she generally whacked at it. It wasn't like this very careful point. She had this alphabet book about Egypt in front of her, so her aide turned to the C section, and the teacher asked the kids, what word do you think Maggie might be thinking of? Kids said Cleopatra and cats, because both of them were part of the alphabet book, and Maggie laughed and turned to the page for canopic jar. So it was just a way that she got to participate in the discussion, using the alphabet, using materials that had been developed with the language that she had access to. It was just a really beautiful teacher that year, just a really beautiful experience of being included in the curriculum. The kinds of strategies that were used to help her do that, probably the single most important, was peers modeling her communication system. I don't know that we've ever pulled off as much modeling as happened that year, but actually asking students to take her proloquo and describe what they were learning, describe the new vocabulary, define new vocabulary words, comment on them with things like nasty. Probably the single most frequent comment that students make with her AAC is to actually describe the curriculum as boring, to describe the lesson as boring. They really like to do that. They like the idea that they have a green light. They're allowed to comment, share opinions, and that's the kind of thing that they say the most often. Her educational assistant worked with different kids in the class to make alphabet books for literally every unit that they came across, and they continue to do that. And that's been a really useful strategy to help pre-teach some of the vocabulary to kids who are otherwise struggling anyway, because it's hardly only the students with Angelman who might struggle with words like sarcophagus or canopic jar. These same students were often the ones to make her adapted books, electronic books, Pictello books, video books, downloading books from the website Tar Heel Reader. We've talked about all of those in previous webinars, and we can talk more about them in the Facebook group. But creating those kind of adapted materials that she could access, again, focusing on words in those materials that she has access to in her communication system. So using her communication system to write out what a pyramid is, to define it, to describe it, and then put that into a book so she can have more review and repetition. And hands-on exploration, trying to go in person to see things at the museum, watching videos of them, that sort of thing. What did Maggie learn from these units? The most important, it was really how to access language in her system so that she could be part of the dialogue that was happening in her classroom, seeing models of other people using her communication system. She definitely developed a deeper awareness of the alphabet. She began to produce a response for the first time that showed us that she was trying to participate in this dialogue. And I think that especially with the Ruby Bridges example, we could see that she was really learning that other people have a different lived experience from her. There's similarities and there's differences, and she can find all kinds of similarities and differences between her life and those of others. But imagine if we had instead put some pictures in front of her and said, your way of participating in the curriculum is show me the mummy, show me the pyramid, show me Ruby Bridges, or point to Ruby Bridges, to Martin Luther King, or touch the color black, touch the color white, or show me, where's the letter B? If we have instead put that kind of focus on things, my knowledge of Maggie, my experience of Maggie is that she would not have participated in any kind of meaningful way, that these sorts of exercises are exactly the kind of things that make her turn her back and withdraw rather than put in the enormous amount of effort that it takes to participate. And if she had been able to do that, if we said, you know, our goal for Maggie, our instructional goal for Maggie is that she will be able to correctly identify the mummy from a field of 3 out of, say, 5 trials, we still wouldn't have really known how much she knows about mummies and how much she had actually learned about that unit, right? I mean, I just don't think we would have had that same thing. Certainly if we had said, Maggie will learn to identify 3 civil rights leaders from a field of 5, or sequence them, or that kind of thing, that we would have had any idea what her level of engagement was with the concept of, for example, what Ruby Bridges went through. And so when we think about what we know about how students learn and what's most valuable for them to learn, many of you who are teachers will be very familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, but we know that the ability to label things, to identify things, to remember like a single fact, to be able to point to something is really sort of the most basic level of knowledge. Being able to describe something, being able to explain something shows us a much deeper level of engagement that, you know, your knowledge right now is listening to me tell you something. If you hear something new, then you now know it. But if you can explain it to someone else, then that really gives us a lot more insight into what you understand. And if you can then take this information and apply it and analyze it and critically evaluate it and decide what part of it you're going to reject, but what part of it makes sense, and use it to create something new, then we know that's what shows us a much deeper level of understanding. So many times, I think, in our attempts to help our kids access the curriculum, we accidentally only give them tasks that focus on that kind of identification, that kind of point to, show me, meaning that we're only asking them to demonstrate knowledge, to try to remember a fact, and not actually pushing them to show us their understanding by using their language. And where I think this is the most important for our students with Angelman is that their barrier, their greatest barrier to the general curriculum is language. Every idea we try to share in science or social studies, history, geography, these are abstract ideas, and the only way to engage with them is language. For our students who have such massive language barriers, we've got to focus on having them actually use their language so they can participate in it. Otherwise, we accidentally try to help create access to a curriculum that relies on language without making sure that we're meeting their language needs. So think back to when you were studying ancient Greece in school. Think back to different units that you had in school, maybe the Civil War, maybe World War II, maybe sitting in class listening to the Pythagorean theorem. I had to Google how to spell that. I don't remember enough about it to even know how to spell it. Think about your class reading Macbeth, maybe in high school. What do you most remember about those different units? We know that the level of remembering is kind of that most basic level of knowledge. Do you remember those different facts about ancient Greece? Do you remember the dates of important battles in the Civil War or during World War II? Do you remember the names of the various treaties or the different world leaders? You may or you may not, but what we know from research is that we can predict what you're going to remember based on whether you thought it mattered. And where this is some of the most disturbing, Kenneth Robinson is just a phenomenal educational researcher. His books are extraordinary. And he's reported on research showing that 40 to 60% of American high school students are not engaged in the content they're learning in their classrooms. So 40 to 60% of general education high school students are sitting in classrooms, not engaged enough beyond the level of knowledge and remembering. They're trying to learn facts just long enough to be able to pass them on a test, but they're not actually learning enough about ancient Greece or the Civil War or World War II to be able to turn that around and really understand what happened in World War II, be able to describe and explain what caused such a massive conflict in our world, and be able to apply that knowledge to make sense of their experience today, to really be able to analyze and evaluate it. This is general education students. And we know that a huge number of them are not taking away what we're trying to teach them in the general curriculum. So as we're thinking about our students with Angelman, the number one rule I think we can really focus on is focusing on what matters. What is the most important? And when I look at the general curriculum, what I see in terms of what really matters is whether students found it powerful. Did they find power in whatever we were studying? Did they, while reading Macbeth, or while learning about ancient civilizations, did they really learn about the power of language and a good story? Did they learn about the power of imagination? Were their imaginations fired based on what they were learning about so that they were really engaged and excited by it? Did they learn about the power of individuals to make change or to come together to make change? Whether it's world leaders, whether it's dictators, whether it's individual citizens coming together as part of a social movement. Did they learn about that? Did they learn about the power of words to explain our own experiences and to relate to the experiences of other people? This is what gets people to go past just remembering information to really engaging it and keeping it so that they can carry that information forward. As we're planning access to the general curriculum for our students with Angelman, the first thing we have to ask is, why does this matter? What is it about this idea that's powerful? What's the so what? If this student learns something about this unit, so what? What has it done to enrich that student's life? What is it about this unit that the student will still remember 20 years from now? If you can't answer that, if you're looking at a unit that's coming up in your classroom, maybe you've got a student in 3rd grade and we're going to be studying pioneers, if we can't answer this question, I'm giving you permission right now to skip it. Skip that. We don't have to include our students with Angelman in every single topic. If we don't know what is powerful or what matters about this unit, then I would say it's better to skip it than to try to teach them a series of facts that we aren't sure what difference it matters. But most of the time, I think that we can, once we think about it, we can figure out what matters. So why are we teaching about pioneer society? Well, we want people to have a strong sense of their own identity as citizens of a country, you know, how their country got settled, how they're similar and different from people in the past, in the ancient past versus the more recent past, right? We're trying to explain how the world is today, and in order to do that, we often have to look back in history. But if we can't come up with a so what, then skip it, because our kids with Angelman have so many challenges that their time is way too valuable for us to waste it on something where we're not sure why it matters. So if we're only teaching them something so we can test them on it, that's not powerful enough, and we can keep going. And that's just my own personal opinion. I'm sure that is not an idea that would be endorsed by a lot of people, but that's my feeling. So general curriculum. The next question, once we have figured out why something matters, why Black History Month or Ancient Egypt or Pioneer Society or the butterfly life cycle, whatever we're teaching, once we've decided why it matters, where the power is for our student, then our next question is, what's the language that we need for this idea? Because we cannot understand any of these ideas without language. And our students with Angelman have massive expressive communication needs, and many of them have very strong receptive communication needs as well. So we have to figure out what's the language that they need so that they can actually start looking at this idea, looking at this unit. We're going to emphasize the words that they can use the most frequently. So as we're looking at ancient Egypt, we've got canopic jars and sarcophagi and mummies and Cleopatra, and we're going to think about the words that that student can use over the next 20 years rather than might only encounter again 20 years from now. So, and this is where the work of people like Gail Van Tatenhove has been so powerful, because we know that being able to point to the picture and identify that that's the pyramid and that's the sarcophagus has really limited value. But if you can use a communication system to describe or define a pyramid or sarcophagus, then if that's the idea you're thinking of, if you're thinking about the Egyptian afterlife and you're thinking about a sarcophagus and you're thinking about mummies, you can describe it enough to other people that they know what you're talking about, even if you don't have access to the word sarcophagus, or even if you don't have access to the word. And think about how often you're trying to think of a word, a term, and you end up just describing it to someone instead. You know, that thing that. And that's how we come up with the words. And we know that nouns help us set a topic. And the beauty of nouns is that they can be represented visually. They're very easy to represent visually, which is why we fall back to them so often and why so many of us are trying to help kids be included in the classroom with exercises like point to the mummy, point to the pyramid, because it's so tangible. It just feels really doable. But nouns really can only set the topic. They don't help us really share and explore the idea. So if we say pyramids, so what? What is it about the pyramids that matters? Is it the fact that they're made of stone? Is it the fact that they're so old? Is it the fact that they were built by humans? Is it the fact that they were built by slaves? What is it that matters. That's where we need verbs and adjectives and the rest of the language in our communication systems. And so as we're thinking about what's the language that we need for this idea, we're thinking about our high frequency language, and we're really going to focus on our verbs and adjectives. It's really easy to look at a unit, and maybe it's the butterfly life cycle, and make a list of new vocabulary words, and then to spend a good hour sitting down programming all those new vocabulary words into the communication system so that our students' Proloquo or their Podbook or their LAMP, whatever they're using, well, probably not their LAMP, but whatever communication system they're using is full of butterfly, caterpillar, egg, chrysalis, that kind of thing. But we really want to be thinking about the words they can use most frequently, the words they're going to be using over the next 20 years. And so how can we get those out? And that brings us to just kind of our third sort of instructional reminder, which is to use repetition with variation. What's so beautiful about focusing on verbs and adjectives is that that's what we use to share and explore an idea, so we can use those all day long. We can focus on describing butterflies in science, or pulleys in gears, or the elements of nature, and then we can move right into history, and we can go back to our same verbs and our same describing words, and now talk about the tools that were used in the society, and then go on to math and actually describe all kinds of math concepts in terms of concepts of time before and after, or concepts of size like large and small, right? Concepts like same and different. We can use those all across the school day. So we can have lots and lots of repetition using these words, but they don't feel like drill and kill because we're using them across so many different units. The general curriculum is really about how we use language. So the general curriculum is all about applying language, using words to tell our stories, share our experiences, share our ideas, learning that even people who are now dead or who are completely gone can still share their ideas and our experiences. And we study historical figures so we can find out what they said and why it matters to us now. We learn about how all kinds of different symbols, such as words and letters and visuals, are arranged and rearranged so that we can do that. But again, the general curriculum is really about language and using language. It's teaching us why we communicate and why words matter. And if you line up a bunch of students, or a bunch of teachers of students with Angelman, and you ask them, what's the biggest struggle you're having with your student's communication system? Overwhelmingly, they say, my student isn't really motivated to use their system. They don't seem to think that their system really matters, that their system really lets them communicate anything, that they can't just communicate with their bodies. And that is our biggest sign that this is what we need to focus on, is showing them how their system is powerful and allows them to tell their stories, share their experiences, learn about the experiences of others, really being able to access language for things more than identifying, for things more than just demonstrating basic knowledge. And this matters to all students. Remember what Ken Robinson reported, as many as 60%, 2 out of 3 of our high school students in the U.S. are not engaged with the curriculum. That means that they're not learning how much words matter, how much language matters, how much we can express with our language even after we are dead, so that our ideas live even longer than we do. We can use peers to do that. If we look at any classroom, any general education classroom, you will have students who are struggling with the language of the unit, students who are struggling with all the new vocabulary and the pace of how quickly new vocabulary is being introduced. And those are the students who most need to be involved in helping our students with Angelman access what's happening. So whether I have found that whether a student is one of the highest achieving in the class or one of the most struggling, if you put a communication system in front of them and you say, here's Maggie's communication system, can you find the words in here to explain what a pyramid is, what democracy is, what liberty is? Can you do that using this system? It's a huge challenge for any of them. For our most advanced students, it's even more challenging, right? So this is a kind of peer support that's really deeply meaningful and valuable for all students. It's not just sitting next to the disabled kid and helping them do some really simple task. The students really start to understand how complex a communication system is when they have to describe such an abstract idea. But for other students, I think some of the students who have gained the most from trying to use Maggie's communication system are those struggling at-risk students, maybe English language learners, those kind of students who maybe their task is to describe Benjamin Franklin. What are they going to say about Benjamin Franklin? What have they learned about Benjamin Franklin? What traits do they associate with Benjamin Franklin? Well, where would they go in her core word system to find describing words about things like that? That's a good question. Now they have to problem solve how they're going to navigate to it. And it's actually easier for those students to look, for example, in a folder in Proloquo and see all these ideas being offered to them and select the idea that makes the most sense than it is for them to generate those ideas on their own. So no matter what level peers are at, they can all benefit from these kind of exercises where we use peers to do it. You're going to find that for teachers, for educational assistants, this is really challenging, but we can do it. We can find the time. We can make these materials, but if we do it with our students, then we're teaching our students at the same time, and that's how we can be some of the most efficient with our time. So now let's take a historical figure like Benjamin Franklin. Let's just try to apply some of these ideas. These are some materials developed by one of the most committed teachers I have ever met, a special educator who was just determined that her student with Angelman was going to be fully included in the general curriculum. So she used clip art and symbol sticks from his communication system and made him a series of adapted books. So here we see Ben Franklin lived in Boston until he was 17. Ben Franklin lived in Philadelphia in 1723. Ben Franklin lived in Paris in 1778. And these kind of materials went on for page after page, and then she developed these exercises where you can see at the top of this page we've got symbols that have been carefully cut out, paper clipped to the page, and now her student would be arranging or rearranging these symbols, these images, to glue them down into the squares you see down below to actually write a sentence about somewhere that Ben Franklin lived. This is an incredibly highly qualified teacher who's incredibly committed, who's spending a lot of energy on an activity that it might be a bit hard to find the power in, right? Looking at this, I don't know that any student is learning about what's really powerful about Benjamin Franklin based on this. Does it matter where Benjamin Franklin lived and when? Well, that depends. It might really matter to one student and not to another. If I'm a student growing up in Boston or growing up in Paris, it might be really powerful for me to know that Ben Franklin lived in the same city I'm in. Maybe it matters and maybe it doesn't, but we really have to stop and ask, does this matter? Is this where we want to put our energy? Is this where we want to have our student with Angelman focus their energy on being able to recite those kind of facts? As you go through, this was a very long book that had been developed for this student with all these different sentence-making pages. At the end, we learned that Ben Franklin believed everyone was equal, that Ben Franklin believed the colonies should be friendly to each other. So this teacher had really worked hard to use accessible language, terminology that she knew her student understood very easily so that he could be part of it, and she had developed these pages. Well, now we're really starting to get somewhere. Now, when we think about what does this student still need to know about Ben Franklin 20 years from now, the fact that he believed everyone was equal and that he helped maybe write the documents to try to make that law in our country, that's getting pretty powerful, right? So does it matter what Ben Franklin believed? That's probably one of the most powerful parts about Ben Franklin. We can look in our textbooks, figure out what has been reported on about Ben Franklin, and then turn that into plain language that any student in the class can use to understand about what matters about Ben Franklin, and we can find that plain language in our students' communication system. If we have an AAC system that meets the criteria that we've laid out in this series for what a robust system is, we should be able to talk about what really matters. So thinking about Ben Franklin, can you say something about what really matters using your students' AAC. If I see any hands raised or any comments, then we can bring those in. I'll show you some things that some other students have said. So Ben Franklin was American, and I am American. He said all people are equal, I'm equal. He worked hard. I work hard when, right? We can ask our students, we can use the example of Ben Franklin, what have you worked hard at? He wanted everyone to learn. Ben Franklin's a huge believer in education. What does it look like when you learn? What are the different things you learn? What are the things you like to learn? Ben Franklin wanted everyone to be free. The students wanted to say believe, but they didn't know how to find the word believe easily in the students' communication system, but they could find the word want. So he said to our student with Angelman, when are you free? What does freedom look like for you? Ben Franklin believed that everyone needed to take care of others. They got that from a piece of text talking about how much Ben Franklin believed in investing in community and just that kind of community values. How do you, as a student with Angelman, take care of others? What does that look like when you're doing that? So these are just some ideas. If anyone has anything you've generated with your students' communication system or anything you're thinking about, go ahead and raise your hand or send it in as a comment, or we can look at it. Later. But I just wanted to give you a chance to be thinking that one through. Use the peers to help access this language. Our general education students, our students who do not have IEPs, cannot afford for you as a teacher, as an educational assistant, to put in all this time making materials for the rest of students, for the one student with Angelman, when they actually really need to go through this experience themselves. They have to think about what is freedom, what is democracy, and really go through trying to learn that vocabulary and explain it back to you using plain language. Where this is really extreme, this might be a little controversial for me to talk about, but where this is really powerfully seen in American politics today, the role of plain language in American politics today, is if you just Google SLPs, speech language pathologists, and Donald Trump, you'll see a whole bunch of SLPs have analyzed the language of Donald Trump to understand, as a presidential candidate, his word choices. And he uses a lot of what we would call core language in a communication system. He uses very plain language. Special educators and speech therapists have analyzed his language as being at about a grade 4 level. And he has brought a huge part of the American population into politics by using language that was more accessible. Now, that's the only positive thing I'm going to say about Donald Trump, but I think it's a really powerful lesson for us in terms of how many of our students going through public education are struggling with language. And if we're going to use language that allows everyone to participate in something as important as democracy, when really supporting democracy is one of the major reasons we have public education in the first place, then we can really see how figuring out how to help our students with Angelman access the language we're using around what we're studying, how valuable that is for their peers. And I'm not going to be able to spend a lot of time on this section since I took too long on some earlier slides. But let's say your class is studying the Declaration of Independence. What is the Declaration of Independence? What is independence? What does independence mean? Can you say it with AAC? If you have your students' communication system in front of you, what can you say about independence? What can you say about how independence makes you feel, or what you can do independently and what you can't do independently? Things like that, right? So what does independence look like when we're playing? What do we like to do independently? When we listen, when we watch. It's when I watch what I want might be one way, or when I walk independently. Or what is freedom? That might be more when I get to watch what I watch what I want. Independence can be about how we use things. Freedom can be the ability to use things, the right to use things, to give things, to make things. It entirely depends on the student. I'm not going to be able to spend as much time on this part as I'd hoped. What is representation? Taking your student's communication system, can you describe representation? It's when, one way of thinking about it is when we say who speaks for us, when we choose who speaks for us. It's when you speak for someone else, when you speak for her. That really tends to be kind of the most basic concept of representation. How about protest, right? The Declaration of Independence was a huge part of looking at the American Revolution, is looking at concepts of things like protest and civil protest. And, this was actually illegal protest at the time to declare the America's independence from Britain. Can we describe what protest is? Can we look at our student with Angelman and say, I protest when? And get some examples of how good our student with Angelman probably is at protest. They're probably actually quite independent in their ability to protest, right? So what is protesting? Well, protesting might be when I say no. Protest might be when I sit down. It might be when I lay down, right? There's a whole bunch of ways. But we can show our students with Angelman that the Declaration of Independence is personally meaningful to them, is powerful to them. It's really about describing the concept of someone's right to protest, someone's right to ask for independence. There's enormous lessons there for our student with Angelman. If anybody came up with definitions for any of these terms, so protest, representation, freedom, independence, I would love to hear them or to have you share them in our Facebook group. But you can see how these are concepts that are very abstract, very difficult to represent with a picture, very language dependent. We have to have language to be able to talk about these, and yet they're very powerful. These are very powerful ideas, and a huge part of why we do public education in the first place is so that our population understands these values, understands these concepts, so that they can be part of a dialogue, so that they can be part of a system of representing the ideas of the American people as we move forward. So what do we learn? When we're studying history, what are we learning? We're learning that ideas expressed in language are important, and our students with Angelman really need to learn that. We're learning by studying history that our ideas and our language, using ideas and language, we can correct wrongs, we can fix mistakes. We're learning that everyone has a voice, everyone has struggled, every part of the American population has gone through hard times. We can learn that from history, we can learn that from reading, and we can find our empathy, we can find our shared experiences, we can also find how we're different. But these are the kinds of lessons that we learn by studying history, and these are important lessons for anyone who's struggling to learn how to relate socially, to communicate socially. When we study science, we're learning why things are the way they are. If we're looking at things like the butterfly life cycle, right? So that's like a rite of passage for every kid to study the butterfly life cycle. We're learning concepts and language around what came first and then what happened next and what happened last. We're learning concepts like little and big, and we're being able to describe things as, the egg is round and the caterpillar is long and the butterfly is really pretty. We're learning about concepts like changing and growing and how we change, and how our own bodies change, going from being babies to teenagers to adults, and how we grow, how each person is growing. So it's a really rich language experience, but we can't really cement what we're learning about science unless we're also learning the language that goes with it. In my daughter Maggie's class, when they read Charlotte's Web out loud, I think this was also somewhere around 4th grade, Maggie was learning concepts again about first and then, so what happened first in the plot and what followed it. She was learning some really basic describing words like little and big, but also some more abstract ones like what is a friend and what does it mean to help. And one of the exercises was all the students in class wrote about the characters in Charlotte's Web by describing them around their character traits. So it was part of both language arts to study a novel, but it was also part of the character education, character development for personal traits. And Maggie participated in a lesson using a great app called Click or Connect and constructing some great sentences. So they took the people who mattered most in the book, the characters, so Charlotte, Templeton, Fern, Henry, Wilbur, and set up a grid so she could talk about them in terms of their character traits. And they brainstormed words like brave and clever and responsible and kind. And we had really carefully practiced how to do this, so we created spaces for things like someone else or something else. So in case she was thinking of a different character, a different word, that might prompt us to go get her communication system. And it was set up so that she would first, select a character, and she's learning about sentence structure. So first she has to decide who she's talking about, and then that character was or was not, and then she would just describe them based on their traits. So Charlotte was clever. This looked great. It looked absolutely wonderful. She came up with some great stuff with it. This was a really careful attempt to help Maggie access the general curriculum and really participate in the general curriculum by being part of the language that was being used, part of the lessons that were being used. And this kind of exercise is called a word bank. So when is this kind of exercise appropriate? What Maggie really learned from this was exploring word order and sentence order, right? And just exploring how to create a sentence. It resulted in something that was really nice to hang on the wall or hang on the fridge, and that part of it was really great. But it was also a huge missed opportunity because we hadn't first used the communication system to decide what words she would have access to in the system. She didn't learn by doing this that she can now access these words on her own once the lesson was over. And this is the kind of example I'm giving of teachers and parents working incredibly hard, investing a great deal of time to create materials to help our kids access the curriculum that are really not an efficient use of our time, because we didn't have the characters from Charlotte's Web in Maggie's AAC, but she certainly had words like brave and mean and kind. And this kind of exercise could have shown us, oh my gosh, Maggie doesn't have access to a word like clever or greedy or responsible. We might have, by brainstorming vocabulary and then making sure that we were taking it from her communication system, this was a missed opportunity. By not doing that, it was a missed opportunity to figure out where were the limits to her system and what needed to be added. Because if she didn't actually have the words that she needed to talk about the characters in Charlotte's Web, then this could have helped us realize words that we needed to add. Or it could have helped us go, maybe a word like, I think greedy is actually a beautiful word, but let's say we're going to say the word greedy, that's the kind of word that maybe we could use other more high frequency words instead, and it would have prompted us to show her how to use the words that she actually had available rather than the more creative, less high frequency words that make more sense. But I really consider this Charlotte's Web activity to just be a missed opportunity. We were still learning how to do this. The word bank made a lot of sense, but it really didn't create access to the curriculum for her. The next year, she had, again, just a wonderful classroom teacher. I think this was grade 6. The students were reading a book called Everest. And when we asked any of Maggie's friends to use the describing words in her prologue quote to comment on the book, the most common thing the girls said was boring. They really did not seem to like this book, and those were the gen ed kids. But in this exercise, basically what the kids were supposed to do was, having just listened to 2 chapters being read out loud, they were really supposed to write a summary of what had happened. And this time, we'd learned some more. We knew better. And so using the communication system, other kids in class helped summarize part of what was happening. The educational assistant read key excerpts, so just short, 2 or 3 sentences at a time from parts of the book, and then asked Maggie to summarize them back using her communication system. So if I read you these 2 sentences, having just listened to that, what do you think the character is feeling? Because that was the purpose. What was really powerful about this assignment was getting students to think about the feelings of the characters and be able to summarize summarize how the experiences had made the character feel in different ways. And in these 2 chapters, it had been very tumultuous. So using Maggie's communication system, she was able to really effectively talk about the feelings of the character, to really summarize them up in different sections of the book and show that she really was understanding it. She was also able to exit out of it and tell her educational assistant that she needed a break, and she refused to answer a question and said, "Time, say, think," and was then asked, "Oh, are you saying you need a break now?" And she was like, "Yes, I need a break now." So using those kind of core words, but you see how this was not such a missed opportunity, because now we're taking the words that she has access to all the time to show her how she can use these words to describe characters in a book. And it's the same words that she has access to for the next book that she reads, and for studying historical figures, and for just talking with friends. It's the same vocabulary she'd have all across. So what Maggie learned from doing this lesson about Everest was how to find keywords that she was going to use many other times. She was learning how she can be part of the dialogue about what everyone else is talking about. Her team learned how they can help her participate in what's happening. They learned what she really needs. They learned how to really keep an activity authentic, and how much time she needs for processing. And her classmates learned about the different words that are available in her system and how they can use them as well. So I would say this was not such a missed opportunity. I think it was a really valuable one. So that's that. I'm sorry we weren't able to spend as much time on the brainstorming section as I wanted to. Whenever I rehearse these, they go so much faster on my own than when I actually started doing them live. For your next steps, if this is something you're really trying to figure out, then I would encourage you to identify topic that's coming up in a curriculum, and make sure you can identify to yourself why this matters, why this unit, whatever it is you're studying, where's the power in it? Where's the so what? What is it you want kids to still know about this 20 years from now? What is it that will make them go, I know I studied ancient Greece and it was so exciting because, what is it? Whatever it is about it, rather than, oh, I know we studied ancient Greece and it was so boring. What matters about it? Where's the power in it? And what's the language around the idea? And then really set yourself a goal to brainstorm that language, to model that language, and see if we can elicit some of that language from the student around that idea, so that they can see and personally experience what it's like to be able to be part of the dialogue in the class. And whether your experiences are successful or not, please consider sharing them in the Facebook group. There's also the Angelman Education and Literacy group. There's I know a few speech therapists have said that they really prefer keeping the conversation with other speech therapists or with other teachers, and so they've actually raised some of the things that they've been working on from this series in other groups on Facebook. That's fine, whatever helps you get talking about it, but share your experiences so that we can really learn from each other and develop the skills of all of us to better help our students connect with the curriculum. And while you think about whether you have any questions or not, let me just say that this, the Angelman Syndrome Foundation Communication Training Series is made available by the ASF through a grant from the Foster Family Charitable Foundation in California. And if you have any questions, Amy, do we have any questions or comments?
We don't have any questions yet. I will mention, just in case anyone's typing in a question right now, I do have the handout from today's webinar uploaded there in the handouts if you want to download it. It will also be available, of course, on our website. You can download it there. I don't see any questions coming in or any hands raised, so I think we might be good to go. Also, I would like to mention the schedule for the